"Sir, my mommy says nobody should eat alone every night." The little girl's voice was so soft that it should have disappeared beneath the clinking silverware and quiet conversations filling the restaurant. Yet somehow it stopped Ethan Walker cold. His hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. Around him, people kept talking, waiters kept moving, and the city beyond the windows kept glowing under the evening lights. But for a moment, everything felt strangely distant. Ethan slowly looked up from his table and found a young girl standing beside him, no older than 6. She wore a simple blue sweater, her blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail, and her expression carried the kind of honesty only children seemed capable of. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't trying to be funny. She simply looked at him as if she had stated the most obvious fact in the world. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For years, no one had spoken to him like that. Not employees, not business partners, not reporters, certainly not strangers, especially not children. The little girl tilted her head slightly. "That's what my mommy says," she added. "She says everybody needs someone to eat dinner with." Ethan stared at her, unable to explain why those simple words felt heavier than any business negotiation he had faced in his career. Then a woman hurried toward them from across the room. "Lily," she said, clearly embarrassed. "I'm so sorry." She gently placed a hand on the girl's shoulder before turning toward Ethan. "I apologize. She likes talking to people." Ethan glanced at the woman. She looked tired but kind, dressed in the restaurant uniform worn by the serving staff. A name tag pinned to her shirt read Grace Bennett. Before Ethan could respond, Lily looked back at him. "You're here every night." Grace's eyes widened. "Lily, you are," the little girl continued. "I see you all the time." Ethan almost laughed at the unexpected observation. She was right. Every Tuesday, every Wednesday, every Thursday, nearly every night of the week. Same corner table, same dinner, same silence. The restaurant had become a routine he never questioned. It was easier than going home, easier than walking into a house where no one waited for him, easier than listening to the quiet. Grace looked mortified. "Please excuse us." She began guiding Lily away. But before they could leave, Ethan surprised himself. "It's okay." Grace stopped. Lily smiled immediately. Ethan wasn't sure why he had spoken. Maybe it was because the child's words had reached a place he thought he had locked away years ago. Maybe it was because she had noticed something no one else seemed to see. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in a very long time, someone had looked at him and seen not a CEO, not a billionaire, not a powerful executive, but simply a man sitting alone at dinner. As Lily disappeared with her mother into the crowd of tables, Ethan found himself watching them. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he had a feeling that this small conversation was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something that would change far more than a single evening. The next evening, Ethan told himself he would choose a different restaurant. The encounter from the night before had lingered in his thoughts far longer than it should have. He had board meetings to prepare for, investors expecting updates, and a schedule packed from sunrise to sunset. A conversation with a 6-year-old girl should have faded into the background of a busy life. Instead, it followed him through the day. He found himself remembering the way Lily had spoken with complete sincerity, as if loneliness was a problem simple enough to solve. By 7 o'clock, despite his earlier decision, Ethan was once again walking through the familiar doors of the restaurant. The hostess greeted him with a polite smile and led him toward his usual table near the window. As he sat down, he immediately noticed something unusual. Before he could even open the menu, a small figure appeared beside the table. Lily grinned as though she had been expecting him. "I knew you would come back," she said proudly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You did?" "Yep. You always come back." Ethan could not argue with that. For years, consistency had been one of the foundations of his life. The same routines, the same schedule, the same restaurants, the same empty house waiting at the end of every day. Lily climbed into the chair across from him without hesitation. "Do you like eating here?" she asked. "I suppose I do," Ethan answered. "Then why do you always look sad?" The question landed harder than he expected. Children had a remarkable ability to walk directly past the walls adults spent years building. Before Ethan could think of a response, Grace approached carrying a tray. The moment she saw Lily sitting there, she sighed softly. "Lily, sweetheart, let the gentleman enjoy his dinner." "We are talking," Lily replied. Grace looked apologetically at Ethan. "I am sorry. Again. To her surprise, Ethan smiled. It is fine. Grace hesitated, clearly unsure what to make of him. Most customers either ignored Lily completely or treated her with polite impatience. Ethan seemed different. After Grace walked away, Lily lowered her voice as if sharing an important secret. My mommy works really hard. Ethan glanced toward the dining room, where Grace moved quickly between tables. I can see that. Lily nodded. She says things will get better. There was no complaint in her voice. No sadness. Just simple faith. Ethan found himself watching Grace for a moment. She looked exhausted, yet every time she stopped at a table, she greeted customers with a warm smile. It reminded him of something he had not seen in a long time: resilience. For reasons he could not explain, he suddenly became curious about their lives. Who were they when they left the restaurant each night? What dreams kept Grace moving forward? What gave Lily that unwavering optimism? As the evening continued, Ethan realized something unexpected. For the first time in years, he had spent nearly 30 minutes at dinner without looking at his phone. And for the first time in even longer, he was actually looking forward to coming back tomorrow. Over the next week, something began to change in Ethan's routine, although he would never have admitted it out loud. Every evening, he found himself arriving at the restaurant a little earlier than usual. At first, he told himself it was because the food was reliable and the atmosphere was quiet. But deep down, he knew the truth had more to do with a 6-year-old girl who somehow made the world feel less distant. Lily always seemed excited to see him. Some nights, she would rush over with a drawing she had made. Other nights, she would simply sit for a few minutes and tell him about her day. She talked about school projects, favorite books, and a science experiment involving a bean plant growing in a plastic cup on her classroom windowsill. Ethan listened more than he spoke, yet somehow the conversations never felt awkward. One Thursday evening, Lily slid into the chair across from him, holding a piece of paper. I made something for you, she announced proudly. Ethan accepted the paper and unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing made with crayons. 3 people sat around a dinner table. The figures were simple, with oversized smiles and stick-like arms, but there was no mistaking what it represented. Ethan recognized Lily immediately. Grace stood beside her. The third figure wore a dark suit and sat in the chair between them. That is you, Lily explained. Ethan stared at the drawing longer than he intended. Why am I here? Lily looked confused by the question. Because families eat together. The words settled heavily in his chest. Before he could respond, Grace approached carrying a tray of drinks for another table. She noticed the drawing and instantly understood what had happened. Lily, she said gently, you cannot just decide things like that. Lily frowned. Why not? Grace smiled apologetically toward Ethan. Please ignore her imagination. But Ethan did not ignore it. In fact, he found himself thinking about the drawing long after the conversation ended. Later that night, he returned to his large home overlooking the city. The house contained everything money could buy: floor-to-ceiling windows, custom furniture, a kitchen larger than some apartments. Yet as he walked through the silent rooms, he could not stop thinking about a crayon drawing made by a child. For years, success had filled every corner of his life except the one that mattered most. There had always been another business goal to chase, another company to acquire, another achievement waiting on the horizon. Somewhere along the way, relationships had become secondary. Then one little girl had arrived and treated his loneliness like a problem worth noticing. The following evening, Ethan returned to the restaurant carrying something unusual. Tucked carefully inside his briefcase was Lily's drawing. He had no idea why he brought it with him. He only knew that for the first time in years, a part of him was beginning to wonder whether the life he had built was truly the life he wanted. And that question was becoming harder to ignore with every passing day. The following week brought an unexpected shift neither Ethan nor Grace seemed prepared for. What began as occasional conversations with Lily had quietly become part of Ethan's day. He found himself checking the clock during late afternoon meetings and calculating how much time remained before dinner. It was a realization that unsettled him. For years, nothing outside of business had occupied that much space in his mind. One evening, as Ethan entered the restaurant, he immediately noticed Lily was not waiting near the entrance as she usually did. The familiar burst of energy that greeted him each night was missing. For reasons he could not explain, disappointment settled over him. He took his seat and glanced around the room. A few minutes later, Grace approached with a glass of water. Her smile appeared more tired than usual. Lily is finishing some homework in the back, she explained before he could ask. Ethan was surprised. She seemed to know exactly what he had been wondering. Big assignment, he asked. Grace laughed softly. A second-grade book report. According to her, it is the most important project in America. Ethan found himself smiling. That sounds about right. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was the first real conversation they had shared without Lily acting as the bridge between them. Grace adjusted the notepad in her hand. I should thank you. Ethan looked up. For what? For being kind to her. She glanced toward the kitchen doors. Children notice more than adults think. She talks about you constantly. Ethan did not know how to respond. No one had described him as important in a child's life before. Grace hesitated before continuing. She has not had many people around besides me. Ethan sensed there was more to the story, but he respected the boundary she had placed around it. She is a remarkable kid, he said. Grace's expression softened immediately. She really is. A few minutes later, Lily emerged carrying a notebook almost as large as her backpack. The moment she spotted Ethan, her face lit up. She hurried across the dining room and climbed into the chair opposite him. Good news, she announced. I got an A on my spelling test. Congratulations, Ethan said. How many words? 20. How many did you get right? Lily grinned proudly. All 20. Ethan pretended to look impressed. That is better than some executives I know. Lily giggled while Grace shook her head from nearby. As the evening continued, Ethan listened to Lily describe her dreams for the future. Some changed every few minutes. Teacher, veterinarian, astronaut, author. Each possibility seemed equally exciting to her. Watching her, Ethan realized something he had not felt in years. Hope, not the ambitious kind tied to profits or growth charts. A simpler kind. The kind that came from imagining a life built around people instead of accomplishments. And as he looked between Lily and Grace, another question quietly formed in his mind. If these evenings meant so much to him already, why did it feel like he was only beginning to discover the story behind the family he had come to care about? Over the next several days, Ethan noticed a pattern he could no longer ignore. Every conversation with Lily left him feeling lighter, yet every conversation with Grace revealed only small pieces of a much larger story. She was always polite, always appreciative, but she carefully avoided talking about herself. The more Ethan learned, the more questions he had. One rainy Friday evening, the restaurant was unusually quiet. Water streamed down the windows while customers hurried inside, carrying umbrellas. Ethan arrived at his usual time and found Lily already waiting with a huge smile. Today is special, she announced. Why? Ethan asked. Because Mommy promised we can have pancakes. Tomorrow morning. Ethan laughed softly. That is what makes a day special. Lily nodded enthusiastically. Pancakes are very important. As she spoke, Grace appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray. Ethan noticed something different immediately. She looked exhausted. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, and her smile seemed forced. Long day? Ethan asked when she stopped by the table. Grace hesitated before answering. Just a busy week. Ethan sensed she was not telling the whole truth. Before he could say anything else, another customer called for assistance, and Grace quickly walked away. Lily watched her mother disappear across the dining room. Mommy has been worried lately, she said quietly. Ethan looked at the little girl. Did she tell you that? Lily shook her head. No, but I can tell. The simple statement stayed with Ethan throughout dinner. Children often understood far more than adults realized. Later that evening, after most customers had left, Ethan remained at his table, finishing a cup of coffee. Grace finally sat down for the first time all night. You do not have to stay and keep me company, she said with a tired smile. Maybe I want to. The words surprised both of them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Grace laughed softly. You know, when Lily first started talking to you, I assumed you would stop coming here. Why? Most people do not enjoy being adopted by a 6-year-old. Ethan smiled. She is persistent. That she is. A comfortable silence followed. It was the kind Ethan rarely experienced. No negotiations. No expectations. No pressure. Just two people sitting at the end of a long day. Then Grace glanced toward the front windows where the rain continued falling. Life does not always go the way you plan, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her. There was something deeper behind those words. Something personal. But before he could ask, she stood up and gathered a few menus from a nearby table. The moment passed. As Ethan prepared to leave, Lily ran over and handed him another drawing. This one showed 3 people sitting beneath a bright yellow sun. Across the top, she had written in large, uneven letters, "Best Friday ever." Ethan folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his briefcase beside the first drawing. As he walked out into the rainy night, he realized something important. He had spent years building a successful company, but somehow a little girl and her mother were slowly teaching him lessons about life that no business school ever could. And for the first time, he wanted to know what struggles Grace was carrying behind that brave smile. The following Friday, Ethan arrived at the restaurant carrying something unusual. It was not a business proposal, a contract, or a presentation. It was a small box of colored pencils he had picked up during a stop at a store that afternoon. The moment Lily saw them, her eyes widened with excitement. "Are those for me?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I heard serious artists need the right tools." Lily carefully opened the box as if it contained treasure. "These are amazing." Grace looked from the pencils to Ethan. "You did not have to do that." "I know," Ethan replied. "I wanted to." For a moment, Grace seemed unsure how to respond. Then she offered a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes in a way Ethan had rarely seen. As the evening continued, Lily spent part of her time drawing at a nearby booth while Grace worked. Eventually, Lily carried a fresh picture to Ethan's table. It showed a large stack of pancakes, 3 smiling faces, and the words "Friday Dinner Club" written across the top. Ethan laughed. "What is this?" Lily looked surprised by the question. "It is our club." "Our club?" "Yes. Every Friday you come here. Every Friday Mommy works. Every Friday we talk. That makes it a club." Ethan glanced at Grace, who was shaking her head with amusement. "Apparently we have a club now," he said. "Apparently," Grace agreed. Somehow the name stuck. The next Friday, Lily greeted him by saying, "Welcome back to Friday Dinner Club." The Friday after that, she made a sign on notebook paper and placed it beside his table. What began as a child's joke slowly became a tradition. Ethan found himself looking forward to Fridays more than any other day of the week. One evening, after Lily became distracted with another drawing project, Grace sat down for a brief break. "You know," she said, "she talks about this every week." Ethan smiled. "The club?" "The club." Grace laughed softly. "She thinks it is the most important event on the calendar." Ethan looked toward Lily. Maybe she is right. Grace studied him for a moment. "You have changed." The observation caught him off guard. "Changed? When you first came here, you always seemed somewhere else. Like your mind never left the office." Ethan considered her words. She was not wrong. "And now?" Grace smiled. "Now you actually seem happy to be here." Ethan looked around the restaurant. The tables were simple. The food was familiar. The atmosphere was ordinary. Yet somehow this place had become the part of his week he valued most. Not because of the restaurant itself, but because of the people inside it. Then Lily suddenly appeared between them holding another drawing. "Look," she said proudly. This time the picture showed 3 people sitting around a table beneath a banner that read "Friday Dinner Club Forever." Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest as he studied the drawing. Forever was a very long time. Yet for the first time in years, the idea of sharing future Fridays with someone did not seem impossible. It seemed like something worth hoping for. The first sign that something was wrong appeared on a Friday. Ethan walked into the restaurant expecting to see Lily waiting with another drawing or another story about school, but her usual seat near the front was empty. He glanced around the dining room and immediately felt a strange uneasiness. As he sat down, he searched for Grace among the servers moving between tables. She was nowhere to be seen. A few minutes passed, then 10. Finally, a manager he recognized approached with a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Walker." Ethan nodded. "Where are Grace and Lily?" The manager's expression changed slightly. "Grace is not working tonight." Ethan waited for more information, but none came. "Is everything all right?" The manager hesitated. "I am honestly not sure. She called earlier this week and said she needed some time off." Ethan stared at him. In all the months he had known them, Grace had never missed a Friday. Not once. The answer should have reassured him, but instead it left him with even more questions. Throughout dinner, he found himself looking toward the entrance every time the door opened. Each time, it was someone else. By the time he left, an uncomfortable feeling had settled in his chest. The following Monday, Ethan returned. No Grace. No Lily. Tuesday came. Then Wednesday. Still nothing. The empty space they left behind felt larger with each passing day. On Thursday evening, Ethan finally asked the manager again. This time the answer concerned him even more. "I have not heard from her since she called," the manager admitted. "I hope everything is okay." That night, Ethan barely slept. He told himself he was overreacting. Families went through difficult weeks. People changed jobs. Life happened. Yet something felt wrong. The next afternoon, while sitting in a board meeting, he realized he had not heard a single word of the presentation. His thoughts kept returning to Grace and Lily. Were they safe? Had something happened? Why had they disappeared without a word? By Friday morning, he could no longer ignore the questions. After years of making decisions worth millions of dollars, this should have been simple. Yet he found himself strangely nervous. For months, Lily and Grace had become part of his life. Somewhere along the way, concern had turned into genuine attachment. That afternoon, Ethan opened his briefcase and pulled out the collection of drawings Lily had given him. Pancakes, sunshine, Friday dinner club, smiling faces gathered around tables. He studied them one by one until his eyes stopped on the picture labeled Friday Dinner Club Forever. The word forever suddenly felt fragile. He leaned back in his office chair and stared out at the city skyline. Then he made a decision. For months, Lily had gone out of her way to make sure a lonely man never felt forgotten. Grace had quietly welcomed him into their world. Now they were gone, and nobody seemed to know why. Ethan closed the folder of drawings and stood up. Whatever had happened, he was not going to sit alone and wonder anymore. He was going to find them. For the first time in years, Ethan canceled an afternoon of meetings for a reason that had nothing to do with business. He started with the only lead he had. The restaurant manager remembered that Grace had once listed an emergency contact address when she was hired. It was several miles away in a modest neighborhood on the edge of the city. Ethan drove there himself. The contrast between his world and theirs was impossible to ignore. Towering office buildings and luxury apartments gradually gave way to older homes, small corner stores, and quiet streets lined with aging trees. When he finally arrived, he sat in his car for a moment staring at the address. Part of him wondered if he was crossing a line. Another part reminded him that people who mattered did not simply disappear without explanation. He walked to the front door and knocked. No answer. He waited and knocked again. Still nothing. Just as he was about to leave, an elderly woman watering flowers next door spoke up. "Are you looking for Grace?" Ethan turned. "Yes." The woman nodded sympathetically. "They moved last week." Ethan felt his heart sink. "Do you know where?" "Not exactly." She set down the watering can. "I only know she was having a hard time. Money troubles, I think." She mentioned finding a smaller place. Ethan thanked her and returned to his car. The answer explained some things, but created even more questions. Why had Grace never said anything? Why had she carried that burden alone? Over the next 2 days, Ethan followed every lead he could find. Not because he was a CEO with resources, but because he genuinely cared. The realization surprised him. Somewhere along the way, concern had become something deeper. On Sunday afternoon, his search finally paid off. A former co-worker from the restaurant remembered helping Grace transport a few boxes to a small apartment complex nearly 20 miles away. Ethan drove there immediately. The building was simple and worn, with narrow walkways and faded paint. It looked nothing like the comfortable neighborhood where Grace had lived before. As he walked through the courtyard, he wondered how difficult things must have become for her to make such a move. Then he saw a familiar bicycle, leaning against a railing. It was bright pink with colorful streamers hanging from the handlebars. Ethan recognized it instantly from one of Lily's drawings. His pulse quickened. He climbed the stairs and found the apartment number. Before he could second-guess himself, he knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. Grace stood there frozen in surprise. Neither spoke at first. Then her eyes widened. "Ethan," he managed a small smile. "I have been looking for you." For a moment, Grace looked overwhelmed. Behind her, he could hear the faint sound of a television and a child's laughter. Then a familiar voice called out from inside. "Mommy, who is it?" Footsteps hurried closer. The next second, Lily appeared in the doorway. Her face lit up so brightly it seemed to erase every difficult day that had come before. "Ethan," she shouted. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him. And in that moment, standing in a small apartment miles away from the life he used to know, Ethan realized he had finally found exactly where he belonged. Grace eventually explained everything that evening. After weeks of falling behind on bills, she had been forced to leave her old apartment and move somewhere more affordable. Between raising Lily alone and working long hours, she had spent months trying to solve every problem herself. When the move happened unexpectedly, she barely had time to inform anyone. She had planned to return to the restaurant once things settled down, but each day brought another challenge. Ethan listened quietly. He did not interrupt. He did not offer solutions right away. For perhaps the first time in his life, he understood that sometimes people needed understanding more than advice. Over the weeks that followed, something beautiful began to take shape. Ethan continued visiting. Sometimes he brought dinner. Sometimes he helped Lily with school projects. Sometimes he simply sat at the small kitchen table talking with Grace after a long day. There was no grand plan, no dramatic promises, just consistent kindness, the kind that slowly changes lives. Months passed. Grace found a new position at a local business with more stable hours. Lily thrived at school, and Ethan discovered something he had spent years searching for without realizing it: peace. One Friday evening, nearly a year after the day Lily first approached him in the restaurant, the three of them gathered around a dining room table. It was not in a luxury restaurant. It was not inside a penthouse overlooking the city. It was in a warm home filled with laughter, framed drawings, and the comforting sounds of people who genuinely cared about one another. Lily was now busy explaining a school project with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything. Grace listened while setting down plates of food. Ethan sat across from them, watching the scene unfold. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply took it all in. The conversation, the smiles, the feeling of belonging. Then Lily suddenly disappeared into another room and returned carrying a folder. "I found these," she announced. Ethan immediately recognized the papers. They were the drawings she had given him over the past year. Pancakes, sunshine, Friday dinner club, smiling stick figures sitting around tables. One by one, she spread them across the table. Finally, she placed the very first family drawing in front of him, the one that had once seemed impossible. 3 people sitting together. Lily pointed proudly at the picture. "See? I told you." Ethan smiled. "Told me what?" Lily looked at him as though the answer should have been obvious. "That things would work out." Grace laughed softly and shook her head. But Ethan felt emotion rise in his chest as he studied the drawing. The child who had noticed a lonely man sitting by himself had never tried to impress him. She had never cared about his title, his money, or his success. She had simply seen someone who looked alone and decided that mattered. Ethan looked around the table once more. Then he realized something extraordinary. The house was not silent anymore. The chair across from him was not empty. The future no longer felt like something to endure. It felt like something to share. And for the first time in many years, as laughter filled the room and dinner continued long after the plates were cleared away, Ethan was no longer eating alone.